When he was rescued by a nurse, the millionaire was paralyzed upon seeing her pendant. The same one his daughter wore when she disappeared many years ago. Jacob McAllister gripped the steering wheel of his luxury sedan, his knuckles turning white as he sped down the deserted road. Charleston's roads were familiar to him, but tonight, the storm had turned them into a treacherous maze. Sheets of rain pounded the windshield, making it almost impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The wipers struggled to keep up, creating a rhythmic screech that echoed through the car. His mind, however, wasn't on the road. It was on Emily. His daughter had been missing for 20 years, but not a day went by that he didn't think of her. Every piece of evidence, every possible lead, he'd followed them all, but they all led to dead ends. It had consumed him, drained the life out of him, leaving behind a man who could no longer enjoy his success. What was the point of his fortune if he couldn't save his own daughter? Suddenly, the car skidded. Jacob's heart leaped into his throat as the tires lost traction on the slick pavement. He gripped the wheel tighter, desperately trying to regain control, but it was too late. The car veered off the road, smashing through the guardrail and tumbling down a steep embankment. The impact was brutal. His head slammed against the window, and everything went black. When Jacob came to, the rain was still pouring. Pain radiated through his body, every breath a struggle. He could hear the soft pitter-patter of rain on the crumpled metal of his car, and the distant rumble of thunder. Dazed, he tried to move but found himself trapped, pinned by the wreckage. His vision blurred, but then, through the fog, he saw her. A figure moving toward him in the rain, backlit by a pair of headlights. For a moment, his heart stopped. Was this it? Was he hallucinating? The figure knelt beside him. "Hey, stay with me. You're going to be okay," a woman's voice called out. She sounded calm, reassuring. Jacob blinked, trying to focus, his mind slowly catching up with reality. This wasn't Emily, it was a stranger. "I'm Mia," she said, placing her hand on his. "I'm a nurse. Help is on the way." Jacob felt her touch, gentle but firm, as she worked to assess his injuries. He could barely move, but he felt the steady rhythm of her breathing, the warmth of her presence. As the rain continued to pour, Mia leaned closer, her face now visible in the dim light. And that's when he saw it. The necklace. His breath caught in his throat. It was impossible, but there it was, hanging from her neck. A simple silver chain with a small, heart-shaped pendant. He recognized it immediately. He'd given that same pendant to Emily on her 10th birthday. His mind raced, the storm outside suddenly fading into the background. Where did you get that necklace?" His voice was weak, barely a whisper, but he had to ask. Mia looked down at the pendant, touching it lightly with her fingertips. "Oh, this. I've had it for as long as I can remember. I was adopted, and this is the only thing I have from my birth family." Jacob's world spun. Adopted. The pendant. Could it be? No. He couldn't allow himself to believe it. He'd been down this road before, only to end up heartbroken time and time again. But something about this moment felt different. Something about Mia felt different. Where are you from?" he asked, his voice growing a little stronger despite the pain. "I was found abandoned near a hospital in Savannah, Georgia," Mia said, shrugging as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. "No one knew who I was, so I ended up in foster care and was later adopted by a family there." Jacob's mind raced even faster. Savannah. Emily had disappeared near Savannah. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, but it was too soon. He couldn't jump to conclusions. He'd been wrong before. He needed proof. Before he could ask more questions, the sound of sirens filled the air. Mia looked up. "The ambulance is here," she said, relief washing over her face. "You're going to be okay." Jacob wasn't so sure. His body might survive, but his heart was now caught in a whirlwind of uncertainty and hope. As the paramedics pulled him from the wreckage, he couldn't tear his eyes away from Mia. The pendant around her neck sparkled in the light of the ambulance, a beacon of both pain and possibility. Could this be the break he'd been waiting for? Jacob lay in the hospital bed, his body stiff and bruised from the crash. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air, but his mind wasn't on his injuries. It was on Mia. That necklace, the pendant that he had given to Emily all those years ago, haunted him, flashing in his mind like a beacon of both hope and fear. Could it be her? Could Mia be Emily, his daughter, lost for so many years? He had to be careful, though. He'd chased so many dead ends, clinging to every scrap of hope, only to have it slip through his fingers. But this felt different. He couldn't ignore the coincidence. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. His business associate, Paul, stepped into the room, his face etched with concern. "Jacob, man, you're lucky to be alive," Paul said, pulling a chair up beside the bed. "How are you feeling?" Jacob managed a weak smile. "I've been better," he replied, his voice rough. "The crash was bad, but there's something else." Paul raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. "The nurse who found me, Mia, she was wearing a necklace, the same pendant I gave Emily before she disappeared," Jacob said, his voice faltering. "She told me she was adopted and found abandoned near Savannah. I can't help but think, what if it's her? What if she's Emily?" Paul leaned back in his chair, letting out a slow breath. "Jacob, I know how much you want to find her, but you've got to be careful. We've been down this road before. You can't jump to conclusions." "I know," Jacob said, rubbing his temples in frustration. "But there's something about this, Paul. The pendant, Savannah. It's too much to be a coincidence." Paul looked at Jacob for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, let's not rule anything out. What's your plan?" Jacob had already been thinking about that. "I need to know for sure. I'll get a DNA test, quietly. I don't want to raise her hopes or mine until I know the truth." Paul nodded, the gears turning in his mind. "I can get in touch with someone who can arrange that discreetly, but it'll take a few days." "That's fine," Jacob said. "The sooner, the better." As Paul left the room, Jacob's thoughts returned to Mia. He didn't know what to make of her. She seemed kind, selfless. It wasn't just the necklace. It was something in the way she carried herself. Something familiar, as if part of Emily was still there, hiding beneath the surface. But he had to be sure. He had been wrong before, and the heartbreak had nearly destroyed him. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts again. This time, it was Mia herself, standing hesitantly in the doorway. She offered a small smile as she stepped into the room. "I just wanted to check in on you," Mia said. "The doctor said you're stable, which is good." Jacob sat up slightly, wincing at the pain in his side. "I'm fine, thanks to you. You saved my life." Mia blushed, waving it off. "I was just in the right place at the right time." As she moved closer, Jacob's eyes flicked down to the pendant again. It glinted in the soft hospital light, a constant reminder of everything he'd lost, and everything he might yet find. "Listen," Jacob began, his voice careful. "That necklace you're wearing. I used to know someone who had one just like it." Mia's hand instinctively went to the pendant, her fingers curling around it. "Yeah, I've had this since I was a baby. It's the only thing I have from before I was adopted." "Why?" Jacob hesitated. He couldn't tell her the truth. Not yet. "It just reminded me of someone I lost a long time ago. That's all." Mia nodded, though her curiosity was clearly piqued. She looked at him for a long moment, as if she could sense there was more he wasn't saying. But instead of pressing further, she simply smiled. "Well, I'm glad I could help. If you need anything, just let me know." She turned to leave, but Jacob's voice stopped her at the door. "Mia, do you know anything about your birth parents?" he asked, his heart pounding in his chest. Mia shook her head, a trace of sadness in her eyes. "No, I've thought about looking for them, but I guess I was always afraid of what I might find. Maybe they didn't want me." Jacob's chest tightened. She had no idea how wrong she was. If Mia really was Emily, he had never stopped wanting her, never stopped searching. "Sometimes the past isn't what we think it is," Jacob said quietly. "Sometimes it's worth looking into." Mia offered him a soft smile. Maybe one day. As she left the room, Jacob's resolve hardened. He would find out the truth, no matter the cost. And if Mia was really Emily, he would never let her slip away again. Jacob lay awake in the hospital bed, his mind a whirlpool of thoughts he couldn't escape. He glanced at the clock. 3 a.m. The quiet hum of the hospital was a stark contrast to the storm of emotions raging inside him. Mia had just left his room hours ago, her words still echoing in his head. She didn't know who her birth parents were. She had lived her whole life believing she had been unwanted. But what if she had been wanted? Desperately. By him. Jacob turned the thought over and over in his mind, unable to shake it. He knew the risks of getting his hopes up. He had been crushed too many times before. But this felt different. The pendant, Savannah, her age, it all lined up too perfectly. He needed answers, and he needed them soon. His phone buzzed on the bedside table, cutting through his thoughts. It was Paul. "I've set up a meeting with a private investigator," Paul said without preamble. "She's discreet, experienced. She'll be at your office tomorrow afternoon." Jacob exhaled slowly. "Thanks, Paul. I'm not sure what I'm hoping to find, but I can't shake this feeling." "Just be prepared, Jacob," Paul warned. "Whatever the outcome, it's going to bring up a lot of old wounds." "I know," Jacob said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But if there's even a chance Mia is Emily, I have to follow it." The next day, Jacob left the hospital early, insisting on being discharged despite the doctor's protests. He couldn't stand to lie in bed any longer waiting for answers. His body ached with every step, but his determination to get to the bottom of Mia's past pushed him through the pain. By mid-afternoon, Jacob was back in his office, a cold, sterile environment that felt so far removed from the turmoil inside him. The private investigator, Alice Turner, was waiting for him. She was sharp, with piercing blue eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She got straight to the point. "You've told me some basics over the phone," Alice said, taking out her notepad. "Mia Whitman, adopted, found abandoned near a hospital in Savannah. You think she could be your daughter?" Jacob nodded, his jaw tightening. "Yes, my daughter, Emily, disappeared when she was 10. I've been searching for her ever since. There are just too many coincidences with Mia." Alice scribbled notes, her expression unreadable. "Coincidences are common in my line of work. But I'll dig into this. I'll start with her adoption records and see what we can uncover." Jacob hesitated before speaking again. "There's something else. I'm worried that someone in my family, my sister, Margaret, might have been involved in Emily's disappearance." Alice's eyebrows shot up, but she remained professional. "That's a big accusation." "I know," Jacob admitted, his voice low. "But there are things from the past that don't add up. Margaret and we've had our issues. She was always jealous of me, of the attention I got from our parents, and she hated how close I was to Emily. I need to know if she had anything to do with what happened." Alice closed her notebook and stood up. "I'll look into everything. Adoption records, your sister, anything that could give us a lead, but be prepared for whatever comes next. This could dig up a lot of things you're not ready for." Jacob nodded grimly. He had lived in the shadow of Emily's disappearance for 20 years. He was ready for anything that came his way now. As Alice left his office, Jacob leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. His heart pounded in his chest, the weight of what he was doing pressing down on him. He had spent 2 decades trying to put the pieces of Emily's disappearance together, only to be left with more questions than answers. And now, with Mia in the picture, everything felt like it was both falling apart and coming together all at once. That evening, Jacob returned to the hospital to visit Mia. He brought a bouquet of flowers as a thank you. though it felt like such a small gesture for someone who had possibly just saved his life. And more. Mia was sitting up in her bed when he arrived, a book in her hands. She looked surprised but smiled when she saw him. "I wasn't expecting you," Mia said, setting the book aside. Jacob placed the flowers on her bedside table. "I wanted to thank you properly for what you did." Mia waved it off with a smile. "It's part of the job. No need to thank me." "I've been thinking a lot," Jacob said carefully, choosing his words. "You told me you were adopted. Do you ever wonder about your birth parents?" Mia's expression softened, but a hint of sadness lingered in her eyes. "Sometimes, but I've made peace with not knowing. My adoptive family was good to me, and I'm grateful for them. Whoever my birth parents were, they had their reasons for letting me go." Jacob's heart clenched. She had no idea what she'd been through. And if she was Emily, she had been taken from him, not abandoned. "I just think it's important to know where you come from," Jacob said, his voice quiet but firm. Mia looked at him curiously, sensing there was more to his words. "Maybe one day I'll look into it." Jacob nodded, his resolve hardening. He couldn't tell her the truth yet, not until he knew for sure. But soon, he would have answers, one way or another. Jacob woke up the next morning with a heavy sense of anticipation weighing on him. He had spoken to Alice late the previous night, and she had informed him that the DNA test was being arranged. It would take a few days for the results to come back. But just knowing that the wheels were in motion made him feel restless. He spent the morning pacing around his house, trying to distract himself by catching up on work. But nothing could pull his mind away from the thought of Mia and Emily. He knew he had to keep calm, but it was impossible not to feel a surge of hope every time he pictured Mia's face. There was something about her, something familiar in her eyes, her mannerisms, that made him feel a connection. But it could all be a coincidence. He had to remind himself of that constantly. The next time Jacob visited Mia in the hospital, he found her sitting by the window, the early afternoon sun casting a golden glow on her hair. She was staring out at the skyline, lost in thought, her fingers absently playing with the pendant around her neck. "Hey," Jacob said softly as he entered the room, careful not to startle her. Mia turned to face him, smiling. "Hey, yourself. I wasn't sure you'd come by today." Jacob walked over to the chair beside her bed and sat down, trying to mask the anxiety that had been gnawing at him since the moment he woke up. "I wanted to check on you, see how you're doing." Mia shrugged, a casual smile on her lips. "I'm fine. The doctors say I'll be out of here soon." There was a brief silence between them, the kind that felt full of unsaid things. Jacob didn't know how to approach the subject on his mind without giving too much away. He knew it was too soon, that he needed to wait for the DNA results before opening up the floodgates of questions. But Mia beat him to it. "So, why do I get the feeling that every time you come in here, you have something on your mind you're not saying?" Mia asked, her eyes locking onto his. There was curiosity there, but also a certain calmness, as if she had been waiting for him to speak up. Jacob's throat tightened. She wasn't wrong. He had been holding back, and it was growing harder with every visit. But this was too delicate. He had to choose his words carefully. "You're right," he admitted, letting out a small sigh. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you, but I didn't want to overstep." Mia tilted her head, curiosity piqued. "Go on." Jacob took a deep breath, steadying himself. "The pendant. It's the same as one I gave to someone very important to me, a long time ago. That's why I reacted the way I did when I saw it." Mia's hand instinctively went to the necklace, her fingers brushing the delicate chain. "I didn't know that. It's always been with me, but I've never known where it came from. Just that it's from before I was adopted." Jacob nodded. I lost someone years ago. My daughter. And this necklace was one of the last things I gave her before she disappeared." Mia's eyes softened. and she looked at him with an understanding that caught Jacob off guard. "I'm sorry, Jacob. That must have been incredibly hard." "It was," Jacob said quietly, "and seeing that pendant on you, it brought up a lot of memories, a lot of feelings." Mia hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "Do you think there's a chance?" She didn't finish the question, but Jacob knew what she was asking. "I don't know," Jacob replied honestly. "I've been trying not to jump to conclusions. I've been down this road before and I've been wrong before, but I can't ignore the possibility." Mia looked down at the pendant again, her brow furrowed. "I've always wondered about my birth parents. I've thought about looking for them, but I never had anything to go on. Just this necklace." Jacob's heart clenched at her words. If she really was Emily, she had spent her whole life not knowing the truth, that she hadn't been abandoned, but taken. "I've arranged for a DNA test," Jacob said gently. "I didn't want to tell you until I was sure, but it's already in the works. It'll tell us whether or not you're my daughter." Mia looked at him, her eyes wide with surprise and a hint of disbelief. "A DNA test? You really think I could be?" Jacob nodded slowly. "There's a chance, and I need to know for sure. But I don't want to get your hopes up. I don't want to get my hopes up either. We just need to wait for the results." Mia sat back in her bed, her expression a mix of shock and contemplation. "I don't even know how to feel about this," she admitted. "I've lived my whole life not knowing who I am, and now, all of a sudden." Jacob reached out and gently took her hand. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together, one step at a time." Mia nodded, squeezing his hand lightly. "Okay, one step at a time." The next few days dragged on painfully slow for Jacob. Every minute felt like an hour as he waited for the results of the DNA test. His mind was a battlefield of conflicting emotions, hope, fear, and the ever-present doubt that had haunted him for 2 decades. He tried to stay busy, focusing on work, but it was no use. His thoughts always circled back to Mia. Was she Emily? Had he really found his daughter after all these years? On the 3rd day, Alice, the private investigator, called him. Her voice was calm and professional as always, but there was a hint of curiosity. "I've started looking into Mia's past," Alice said. "It wasn't easy. Adoption records are often sealed, and it takes some digging to get the details. But I've managed to find a few things." Jacob leaned forward in his office chair, his heart pounding in his chest. "What did you find?" "Well, as you know, Mia was found abandoned near a hospital in Savannah when she was just a baby," Alice explained. "There was no identifying information left with her, no birth certificate, no notes, nothing. She was taken in by the hospital staff and eventually placed in foster care. After a few years, she was adopted by a couple who lived in the area. They were good people, by all accounts. No red flags." Jacob's stomach tightened. "So, no leads on who her birth parents might have been?" Alice hesitated for a moment. "Not exactly. There was something unusual in the hospital records, though. When Mia was found, she was wearing that pendant, the one you told me about. The hospital staff noted it in the report. But there's no record of any attempts to trace where the pendant came from. It's as if it was overlooked or dismissed as unimportant." Jacob clenched his fists. That pendant was the key. He was sure of it. "What about anything else? Any witnesses? Anyone who might have seen something?" "Nothing," Alice replied. "It's like she appeared out of nowhere. No one ever came forward to claim her, and no one reported a missing child matching her description in the area at the time. It's a dead end." Jacob leaned back, feeling the weight of her words press down on him. "What about Margaret? Did you find anything that connects her to this?" Alice's tone shifted slightly. "I haven't found anything concrete yet, but there are a few things that don't sit right with me. Margaret was in Savannah around the time Mia was found. She had business dealings in the area, according to public records. It could be a coincidence, but it's worth looking into." Jacob's heart sank. He had always suspected his sister, but hearing that she was in Savannah during that time felt like a punch to the gut. Could she really have been involved? Could she have taken Emily and abandoned her? "I'll keep digging," Alice said, "but I want to caution you, Jacob. If Margaret was involved, proving it won't be easy. She's covered her tracks well over the years." Jacob nodded, even though Alice couldn't see him. "I understand. Just keep me updated." After hanging up the phone, Jacob sat in silence for a long time, his thoughts racing. He didn't know what to believe. If Mia really was Emily, and if Margaret had anything to do with her disappearance, it would tear the family apart. But Jacob needed to know the truth. He had lived in the dark for too long. Later that evening, Jacob visited Mia at her apartment. She had been discharged from the hospital a day earlier, and though she still had a few lingering aches from the accident, she seemed to be doing much better. Her small, modest apartment was cozy, a stark contrast to Jacob's sprawling mansion. He couldn't help but wonder how different Mia's life might have been if she had grown up as his daughter. "Hey." Mia greeted him with a warm smile as she opened the door. "Come on in." Jacob stepped inside, taking in the homey atmosphere. Photos of Mia and her adoptive family lined the walls, smiling faces from birthdays, vacations, and graduations. It was clear that she had been loved and cared for, even if she had never known her real parents. "I was just making some tea," Mia said, gesturing toward the kitchen. "Want some?" "Sure," Jacob replied, following her into the kitchen. As they sat down with their tea, Mia looked at him with a curious expression. "So, you said you had a private investigator looking into my past?" Jacob nodded. "Yes, I know it's a lot, but I wanted to make sure we weren't missing anything. I didn't want to leave any stone unturned." Mia's expression softened. "I appreciate that. I've always wondered, about where I came from, but I never really had the courage to dig too deep. I guess I was afraid of what I might find." Jacob's chest tightened at her words. She had no idea just how close they were to the truth. "I understand," Jacob said quietly, "but sometimes the truth is worth finding, no matter how hard it is." Mia nodded, looking down at her tea. "Yeah, maybe you're right." Jacob hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Alice, my investigator, found out a little more about your past. There wasn't much, but she confirmed that the pendant you've always had was noted in the hospital records. It was with you when they found you." Mia's eyes flickered with recognition. "The pendant? It's the only thing I've ever had from before I was adopted. It's like a piece of me." Jacob looked at her, his heart heavy. He couldn't tell her everything yet, but he knew they were getting closer to the answers they both needed. The days that followed were a blur for Jacob. His mind was consumed by the question that had haunted him for decades. Was Mia really his daughter? Emily? Each passing moment without an answer felt like a lifetime. He threw himself into work to distract from the waiting, but nothing could keep the gnawing anxiety at bay. Every time his phone buzzed, his heart raced, hoping it was the call with the DNA test results. On the fourth morning, as Jacob sat at his desk, staring blankly at a report he couldn't focus on, the call finally came. He grabbed the phone, his hands shaking slightly. "It's Alice," came the familiar voice on the other end. "I've got the results." Jacob's heart skipped a beat. He swallowed hard, trying to steady his breath. And there was a brief pause on the line, and Jacob's mind raced with all the possible outcomes. Then Alice spoke, her voice calm but firm. "Jacob, the DNA test confirms it. Mia is Emily. She's your daughter." Jacob sat back in his chair, the weight of her words crashing over him like a tidal wave. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Mia, Emily, his daughter, the little girl he had lost so many years ago, was alive. The necklace, the adoption, the coincidences. They weren't coincidences after all. He felt an overwhelming surge of emotion, relief, joy, disbelief, all mixing together in a storm inside him. But with it came the realization that this was only the beginning. The journey to reunite with Emily wouldn't be simple. She didn't know the truth yet, and there was still the matter of Margaret. "Jacob?" Alice's voice brought him back to the present. "Are you there?" "Yes," Jacob said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say." "I know this is a lot to process," Alice said gently, "but there's more. I've been digging into Margaret's background like you asked, and there are things that don't add up." Jacob's relief quickly gave way to a cold, sinking feeling in his gut. "What do you mean?" "I looked into Margaret's travel records from 20 years ago, around the time of Emily's disappearance. She was in Savannah on multiple occasions. At first, it seemed like routine business trips, but some of the records were odd. There were gaps, unexplained expenses. It doesn't prove anything outright, but it raises red flags." Jacob felt a chill run down his spine. He had suspected for years that Margaret had something to do with Emily's disappearance, but hearing it laid out like this made it feel all too real. "Jacob," Alice continued, her voice firm, "I think there's a strong chance Margaret was involved in what happened to Emily. I'm not sure to what extent yet, but it's clear that she was in the area around the time Emily vanished." Jacob clenched his fists, the familiar anger and betrayal bubbling up inside him. He had trusted Margaret. She had been his sister, his family. How could she have done this? How could she have taken his daughter and let him suffer for all these years? "I need proof," Jacob said, his voice hardening. "I need to confront her, but I can't do it without evidence." "I'll keep digging," Alice promised, "but be careful, Jacob. This is going to be messy." Jacob hung up the phone and sat in silence, his thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. He had found his daughter, but now he had to face the dark truth about his sister. He wasn't sure how he would handle it, but one thing was clear: he couldn't let Margaret get away with it. Later that evening, Jacob sat in his car outside Mia's apartment, gathering the courage to go inside. How could he tell her the truth? How could he explain that she had been living a life built on lies? That she wasn't just Mia Whitman, but Emily McAllister, his daughter? His hand tightened around the steering wheel as he stared at the warm glow of the lights in her window. He had waited 20 years for this moment, but now that it was here, he didn't know how to begin. Finally, he took a deep breath and got out of the car. He couldn't wait any longer. Mia opened the door with her usual smile, but it faded when she saw the look on Jacob's face. "Jacob? What's wrong?" He stepped inside, the weight of the truth heavy on his shoulders. He couldn't keep it from her any longer. She deserved to know. "Mia, we need to talk," Jacob said, his voice low. She led him to the small living room, concern etched on her face. "You're scaring me. What is it?" Jacob sat down, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to find the right words. "I've been doing some digging into your past, into who you are, and I have the results of the DNA test." Mia's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. "And?" Jacob's voice broke as he spoke. "Mia, you're my daughter. You're Emily." For a moment, there was only silence. Mia stared at him, her eyes wide with shock, her mind struggling to comprehend what he had just said. Then, slowly, she shook her head. "No, that's not possible," she whispered, her voice trembling. "That can't be true." Mia sat frozen on the couch, her face pale, her mind struggling to catch up with the bombshell Jacob had just dropped on her. The words echoed in her head. "You're my daughter. You're Emily." It didn't make sense. Her entire life, she had known herself as Mia Whitman, the girl who had been adopted and raised in Savannah. How could everything she had believed be a lie? Jacob sat across from her, his heart aching as he watched the shock wash over her face. He knew this was a lot to take in, and he didn't blame her for the disbelief. But he had waited 20 years for this moment, and now that it was here, he couldn't let it slip away. She needed to understand the truth, no matter how painful it was. "Mia," Jacob said softly, leaning forward. "I know it's hard to believe, but the DNA test proves it. You're my daughter, Emily. I've been searching for you ever since you disappeared 20 years ago." Mia shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "But I don't remember anything. I don't remember being Emily. How could I not know?" Jacob swallowed the lump in his throat. "You were only 10 years old when you were taken. It's possible that over time, you buried those memories, or maybe you were too young to hold on to them. But I've never stopped looking for you, not for a single day." Tears welled up in Mia's eyes as the weight of Jacob's words began to sink in. She had always wondered about her birth parents, had always felt the emptiness of not knowing where she came from, but she had never expected anything like this. "Why didn't you say anything before?" Mia asked, her voice trembling. "Why did you wait?" Jacob sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't want to get your hopes up. I didn't want to get my hopes up. I followed so many false leads over the years, and every time, I've been crushed. I couldn't bear to put you through that if I was wrong. But I had to know for sure. That's why I had the DNA test done." Mia sat back, her mind spinning. Everything she thought she knew about her life, her identity, had just been turned upside down. She didn't know how to feel. Anger, confusion, grief. All of it mixed into a storm of emotions she couldn't begin to sort out. Jacob watched her, his heart heavy. He wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but he knew this was a moment she had to process on her own. He had spent 20 years grieving the loss of his daughter, but for Mia, the revelation that she was Emily was like having the ground ripped out from under her. "I understand if this is overwhelming," Jacob said gently. "You don't have to make sense of it all right now, but there's more you need to know." Mia looked up at him, her eyes full of questions. "What else?" Jacob hesitated. This was the part he had dreaded the most, the part that would shatter not just Mia's understanding of herself, but also her perception of his family. "I believe that my sister, Margaret, was involved in your disappearance," Jacob said, his voice tight. "She was in Savannah around the time you went missing, and there are things I've uncovered that point to her being responsible for taking you." Mia's eyes widened in disbelief. "Your sister? Why would she do something like that?" Jacob clenched his fists, the familiar anger bubbling up inside him. "Margaret has always resented me. She hated that I was the favorite in our family, that I got more attention, more opportunities, and she was jealous of how close I was to you. I think she wanted to hurt me, and taking you away was the ultimate way to do that." Mia stared at him, stunned. The idea that someone could harbor so much hatred that they would take a child away from their family, it was incomprehensible. She tried to wrap her mind around it, but it felt too big, too dark. "She let you think I was dead for all these years?" Mia asked, her voice breaking. Jacob's throat tightened. "I don't know what she was thinking. I don't know if she ever intended to tell me the truth, but I'm going to confront her. I need to know why she did it, and I need her to face the consequences." Mia wiped the tears from her eyes, her emotions a whirlwind of shock and anger. "I can't believe this. I've lived my whole life not knowing who I really am, and it's because of her." Jacob nodded, his jaw clenched. "Yes, but we're going to get answers. Mia, I promise you." Mia's mind was racing, the revelations coming too fast for her to fully process. She didn't know how to feel, grateful that she had found her father or furious that she had been robbed of her past by someone so close to him. But one thing was clear. She needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it was. "What do we do now?" Mia asked, her voice steadying as she wiped her eyes again. Jacob stood up, his resolve hardening. "Now, we confront Margaret, and we get the truth out of her." Jacob stood outside Margaret's sprawling estate, his heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't been here in years. He'd distanced himself from his sister long ago, not fully understanding why he felt so uneasy around her. Now, The pieces were falling into place. The woman he had once trusted, his own flesh and blood, might have been the one responsible for taking away the most important person in his life. As he approached the front door, Jacob's mind raced with all the things he wanted to say, the questions he needed to ask. But he knew this confrontation wouldn't be easy. Margaret was manipulative, calculating. She would deny everything if she could. He needed to stay calm, focused, and most importantly, he needed to be ready for whatever came next. The door swung open before he could knock, and there stood Margaret, her sharp features and perfectly styled hair making her look every bit the poised and polished woman she had always been. But there was a flicker of something in her eyes, surprise, maybe even a hint of guilt. "Jacob," she said, her voice smooth but guarded. "This is a surprise. I wasn't expecting you." Jacob stepped inside, his expression hard. "We need to talk." Margaret raised an eyebrow, but didn't resist as he entered her home. "Of course. What's this about?" Jacob turned to face her, his anger barely contained. "It's about Emily." Margaret froze for a split second, just long enough for Jacob to notice the tension in her posture. She quickly recovered, her face neutral. "What about Emily?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," Jacob said, his voice low and steady. "I've spent the last 20 years searching for her, grieving her loss, and now I know the truth. Mia is Emily. She's alive." For the briefest moment, Jacob saw the flicker of recognition in Margaret's eyes. It was all he needed to confirm his suspicions. But she didn't give in easily. "Mia? The nurse from your accident?" Margaret feigned confusion, her lips curling into a dismissive smile. "Jacob, that's ridiculous. Emily's been gone for years. You've been chasing ghosts." Jacob's fists clenched at his sides. "The DNA test proves it, Margaret. She's Emily, and I know you had something to do with her disappearance." The mask of calmness on Margaret's face wavered, but she quickly regained control. "That's absurd," she said, her voice growing colder. "You've always had a wild imagination, Jacob, but this is too much, even for you." Jacob took a step closer, his voice filled with the weight of 2 decades of pain and anger. "Don't lie to me, Margaret. I know you were in Savannah around the time Emily disappeared. I've seen the records. You've kept this secret for years, and now it's time to tell the truth." Margaret's eyes flashed with something dark. Fear, perhaps, or maybe anger. She took a deep breath and crossed her arms, her gaze hardening. "You want the truth? Fine." For a moment, Jacob's heart stopped. He hadn't expected her to give in so easily. But as Margaret spoke, her voice was laced with bitterness. "Yes, I was in Savannah," she admitted. "I was there on business. And yes, I saw Emily. But it wasn't some grand conspiracy, Jacob. She ran off, like she always did. Headstrong, just like you. I tried to bring her back, but she didn't want to come. She blamed you for everything, your constant work, your obsession with control." Jacob felt like he had been punched in the gut. The idea that Emily had run away, that she had blamed him, was more painful than he could have imagined. But Margaret's words didn't ring true. There was something off in her story, something she wasn't saying. "So you just let her go?" Jacob demanded. "You didn't call me. You didn't think I deserved to know where my daughter was." Margaret shrugged, her expression icy. "What was I supposed to do? You were impossible to reach. And by the time I tried to find her again, she was gone." Jacob stared at her, his anger boiling over. "You expect me to believe that? That you just lost her? That you didn't have anything to do with her being abandoned near a hospital, wearing the necklace I gave her?" Margaret's composure cracked, and for the first time, Jacob saw the fear in her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The silence stretched between them, heavy with all the things left unsaid. Finally, Margaret spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." Jacob's heart clenched. What did you do, Margaret?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and for the first time, Jacob saw the guilt she had been hiding for years. I thought if I took her away, you'd finally understand. You'd finally see how much damage you'd done, how your obsession with your work had destroyed everything. I didn't think she'd disappear like that. I didn't know." Jacob couldn't believe what he was hearing. His sister, the woman he had grown up with, had taken his daughter in some twisted attempt to teach him a lesson. The pain, the anger, it was all too much. "You destroyed my life," Jacob said, his voice shaking with rage. "You let me believe my daughter was gone. And for what? To prove a point." Margaret looked down, unable to meet his gaze. "I never meant for it to go this far, Jacob. I'm sorry." But Jacob wasn't sure he could ever forgive her. Jacob couldn't move. He stood there, staring at Margaret, unable to comprehend the depth of her betrayal. The air in the room felt thick, like it was pressing down on him, suffocating him with the weight of the truth. His own sister had stolen his daughter and let him suffer for 2 decades, all because of some twisted resentment. Margaret wiped at her eyes, but the guilt was clear on her face. "Jacob, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't mean to hurt you like this." Jacob's hands trembled, his rage bubbling up to the surface. "You didn't mean to hurt me. Margaret, you destroyed me. You took Emily away. You let me think she was gone forever." Margaret looked down, avoiding his gaze. "I was angry. I wanted you to feel what I had felt for years, ignored, neglected. I wanted you to see what it was like to lose something important." "You took a child," Jacob shouted, his voice breaking. "You didn't just hurt me. You ruined her life too. Do you even understand what you did?" Margaret flinched at his words but didn't respond. Jacob paced the room, unable to stand still as the anger coursed through him. Every second of those lost years flooded back. The sleepless nights, the empty holidays, the constant ache in his chest every time he thought about Emily. And all along, Margaret had known, and she had done nothing. "How could you?" Jacob's voice was quieter now, but still thick with pain. "How could you live with yourself?" Margaret finally looked up at him, her face pale and drawn. "I thought I could fix it. After a while, I didn't know how to make it right, so I buried it. I tried to move on." Jacob shook his head in disbelief. "Move on? You let me grieve for years. You let Emily grow up without knowing who she really was, without her family. How can you ever make that right?" Margaret opened her mouth to respond, but the words seemed to die on her lips. There was no excuse, no explanation that could justify what she had done. "You can't fix this," Jacob said, his voice final. "There's nothing you can say that will undo the damage." Margaret's eyes filled with tears again, but Jacob couldn't find it in himself to feel any sympathy for her. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and now there was only one thing left to do. "I'm going to tell Mia the truth," Jacob said, his voice steady. "She deserves to know everything." Margaret's eyes widened in panic. "No, Jacob, please." "She deserves to know what you did." Jacob cut her off, his tone resolute. "She deserves to know who took her life away from her." Margaret stepped forward, desperation in her voice. "I'll lose everything. I'll lose you. I'll lose her. Please, Jacob, don't do this." Jacob looked at her, feeling the full weight of her plea, but his decision was made. Margaret had already lost him the moment she took Emily away. And as for Mia, she would never forgive Margaret for what she had done, nor should she. "You've already lost us," Jacob said quietly. "You lost us the day you decided to take her." Without another word, Jacob turned and walked out of the room, leaving Margaret standing alone, her tear-streaked face frozen in shock. He didn't look back. There was nothing left for him here. When Jacob returned to Mia's apartment later that evening, his heart was heavy with the weight of the truth. He had found his daughter after all these years, but it had come at a cost he hadn't anticipated. Telling her about Margaret was going to be the hardest thing he'd ever done, but she needed to know. She deserved to know who had stolen her past. Mia greeted him at the door, her expression filled with concern as soon as she saw his face. "Jacob, what happened?" He stepped inside, his movements slow and deliberate. "There's something I need to tell you." They sat down on the couch, and Jacob took a deep breath, preparing himself for the conversation that was about to unfold. He looked into Mia's eyes, the same eyes that had once belonged to a little girl he had lost, and now, after 20 years, found again. "It's about Margaret," Jacob began, his voice heavy with emotion. "She's the reason you disappeared." Mia's eyes widened in shock, her breath catching in her throat. "What? What are you talking about?" Jacob clenched his fists, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Margaret took you, 20 years ago. She took you away from me. She abandoned you near that hospital in Savannah." Mia stared at him, her face a mask of disbelief. No, that can't be true." "It is," Jacob said, his voice breaking. "She did it because she wanted to hurt me. She was angry, jealous, and in her twisted mind, taking you away was the way to get back at me." Mia's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. "I can't believe this. I can't believe someone would do that." Jacob reached out, taking her hand in his. "I'm so sorry, Mia. I'm sorry that this happened to you. But I'm here now, and I'm not going to let her hurt you ever again." Mia's tears fell freely as the weight of Jacob's words settled over her. She had spent her whole life wondering who she really was, and now that she finally knew the truth, it was more painful than she could have ever imagined. Mia sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, her mind racing to make sense of everything Jacob had just told her. The shock of the revelation, Margaret's betrayal, her role in Mia's disappearance, hit her like a tidal wave. She couldn't process it. She couldn't wrap her mind around the fact that someone so close to Jacob, someone who was supposed to be family, had stolen her entire life away from her. Jacob watched her carefully, unsure of what to say, unsure of how to comfort her. He had spent 20 years grieving the loss of his daughter, but for Mia, the loss was just beginning. She had lived her life without knowing who she truly was, and now, in a single conversation, everything had changed. It wasn't just the revelation that she was Emily. It was the knowledge that Margaret, the woman Jacob had trusted, had orchestrated her disappearance. Mia finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to feel. How could she do that to me? How could she do that to you?" Jacob squeezed her hand, his own heart aching at the sight of her pain. "I don't know. I wish I had an answer for you, Mia. I've been asking myself the same question since I found out. But Margaret, she's always been jealous. I never thought she could do something like this, but she did." Mia looked up at Jacob, her eyes filled with tears. "She let me think I was abandoned. She let me believe that no one wanted me." Jacob's chest tightened, and he pulled Mia into a gentle embrace. "I wanted you, Mia. I never stopped looking for you. I never gave up." Mia clung to him, her tears soaking into his shirt. The weight of everything she had lost, her childhood, her sense of belonging, her family, pressed down on her. She had spent her entire life feeling like something was missing, and now she knew why. She had been taken from the people who loved her, all because of a woman's twisted vendetta. As Mia's sobs subsided, she pulled back and wiped her eyes. "What happens now? What are we going to do?" Jacob sighed, his jaw tightening. "Margaret has to face the consequences of what she's done. She can't just walk away from this." Mia nodded, but there was a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. "Do you think she'll ever admit to what she did? Or will she keep lying?" Jacob's face darkened. "I don't know. But it doesn't matter. We have the proof. The DNA test proves who you are, and we have enough evidence to show that Margaret was in Savannah when you disappeared. Whether she admits it or not, she's going to have to answer for what she did." Mia sat quietly, her hands trembling as she tried to process the enormity of it all. The idea of confronting Margaret, of facing the woman who had taken her life away, filled her with a mix of fear and anger. But she knew it was something she had to do. She couldn't move forward until she had faced the truth head-on. "I want to be there," Mia said suddenly, her voice firm. "When you confront her, I want to hear what she has to say." Jacob hesitated, unsure if that was the best idea. He didn't want to put Mia through more pain, but he understood her need for closure. "Are you sure?" Mia nodded, her eyes hardening with determination. "I'm sure. I need to hear it from her. I need to know why." Jacob took a deep breath and nodded. "All right, we'll do it together." The next day, Jacob arranged for a meeting with Margaret. He didn't tell her what it was about, only that it was urgent and that she needed to come to his office. Margaret agreed, though her voice over the phone carried a note of hesitation. She must have known, on some level, that her lies were starting to unravel. When Margaret arrived, she walked into the office with her usual air of confidence. But that confidence faltered the moment she saw Mia sitting beside Jacob. Her eyes flicked nervously between the two of them, and she quickly masked her unease with a tight smile. "Jacob, Mia," Margaret greeted them, her voice strained. "What's this about?" Jacob didn't waste any time. He stood up and faced his sister, his expression cold and resolute. "It's about what you did. It's about Emily." Margaret's face went pale. "Jacob, I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," Jacob interrupted, his voice sharp. "We know everything. Mia is Emily. The DNA test confirmed it, and we know you were the one who took her." Margaret's mouth opened, but no words came out. The room was filled with an oppressive silence as the weight of Jacob's accusation hung in the air. Mia stared at Margaret, waiting for her to speak, waiting for her to confess. But instead, Margaret's expression hardened, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I was trying to protect her," Margaret said finally, her voice low. "I was trying to protect her from you." Jacob's eyes flashed with anger. "Protect her? You abandoned her, Margaret. You left her to grow up without her family, without knowing who she was." Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but there was no remorse in her voice. "You were destroying her, Jacob. You were obsessed with your work, with control. She needed to get away from you." Mia stood up, her voice trembling with rage. "You didn't protect me. You stole my life." Margaret looked at Mia, her face contorted with a mix of guilt and defiance. "I was trying to save you." "No," Mia said, her voice cold. "You were trying to punish him. And you ruined both our lives in the process." The room fell silent after Mia's words, her voice still hanging in the air like a storm that had passed, but left destruction in its wake. Margaret stood there, frozen, her hands clenched tightly at her sides. For a moment, it seemed like she might fight back, deny everything, twist the truth as she always had. But as she looked into Mia's eyes, Emily's eyes, something in her broke. "I never meant for this to happen," Margaret whispered, her voice shaking. I thought I was doing the right thing." Jacob stared at her, his heart heavy with both anger and sorrow. He had known Margaret all his life, but this woman standing in front of him, so consumed by bitterness and regret, was a stranger to him now. "You didn't do the right thing, Margaret," Jacob said quietly, his voice full of restrained pain. "You took everything from us. You destroyed our family. And for what? To punish me." Margaret wiped at her eyes, but the tears kept falling. "I didn't know what to do. I was so angry, so jealous. You had everything, Jacob. The success, the attention, the love from our parents, and I had nothing." Jacob shook his head, his voice thick with disbelief. "So you took the one thing that mattered most to me. You took my daughter. You let her grow up thinking she wasn't wanted, that she was abandoned." Margaret flinched at his words, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she turned to Mia, her eyes pleading. "Emily, Mia, I know I hurt you. I know I can never make up for what I did, but I swear, I thought I was helping you. I thought you'd be better off without him." Mia's expression was unreadable as she stood there, arms crossed, listening to Margaret's desperate explanation. "You didn't care about me," Mia said, her voice steady but cold. "You cared about hurting Jacob. That's all this ever was." Margaret opened her mouth to protest, but the words died in her throat. Deep down, she knew Mia was right. She had told herself for years that she was doing the right thing, but in the end it had always been about her own jealousy, her own need to lash out. "I'm sorry," Margaret whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry." Jacob let out a slow, deep breath, his emotions swirling inside him like a storm he couldn't control. For years, he had imagined what it would be like to confront the person responsible for taking Emily from him. But now that the moment had come, he didn't feel the satisfaction he had expected. There was no victory in this, only the hollow, aching realization that the damage was done, and nothing could undo it. "Your apology doesn't change anything," Jacob said, his voice tired. "You can't fix what you've broken." Margaret lowered her head, silent, her guilt weighing heavily on her shoulders. Mia took a step forward, her eyes locked on Margaret. "I don't forgive you," she said quietly, but with conviction. "What you did to me, to us, it's unforgivable." Margaret looked up at Mia, her eyes filled with despair. But she didn't argue. She knew there was no forgiveness for what she had done. Mia's gaze softened slightly, and she spoke again, her voice calmer. "But I don't need your apology. I don't need anything from you. You've taken enough from me already." Jacob watched as his daughter, stood strong, refusing to let Margaret's actions define her any longer. He felt a surge of pride, mixed with sadness for all the years they had lost. But here she was, standing in front of him, choosing to move forward. "We're done here," Jacob said finally, his voice steady. "There's nothing more to say." Margaret looked like she might protest, but instead, she nodded, defeated. She turned and walked out of the room, her footsteps heavy with the weight of her guilt. Jacob didn't watch her leave. He didn't need to. As far as he was concerned, Margaret was no longer a part of their lives. When the door closed behind her, the room was filled with a heavy silence. Jacob and Mia stood there, neither of them speaking for a moment, both trying to process the confrontation that had just unfolded. Finally, Mia let out a long breath and turned to Jacob. "What happens now?" Jacob looked at her, his heart full of love and regret. "Now, we move forward. We rebuild. Together." Mia smiled, though there was still sadness in her eyes. "It's going to take time." "I know," Jacob said, stepping closer and placing a hand on her shoulder. "But we have time now. We have each other." Mia nodded, and for the first time in a long time, Jacob felt a sense of peace settle over him. The past would always be there, with all its scars and pain, but they didn't have to let it define their future. They had found each other again, and that was enough. As they stood together in the quiet room, the weight of everything that had happened began to lift, if only slightly. There was still healing to be done, still pieces to pick up, but they would do it together. The long, painful journey of the last 20 years was finally over, and now they could start again,